Welcome to Blacklight Mass Incarceration Show. I am your host, Sierra Cobb. Blacklight Mass Incarceration Show is a space that is used to uplift the unheard voices of the criminal and social justice issues that many face today. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy. Sponsored by Emancipate NC. Thank you, Maurice, for coming on Blacklight Mass Incarceration Show to speak with us about the work that you do. From my understanding, you have our work with the National Exonerees, doing some research and things of that nature. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. The National Registry of Exonerations is an online database. People want to find it. Just Google National Registry of Exonerations. It's an online database of, well, we're approaching now 3,400 wrongful convictions in the United States since 1989. And I'll get back to 1989 in a second. It's a 3-university project. It's Michigan Law School, Michigan State Law School, and the University of California, Irvine. And was launched in 2012. And it was originally a project of Northwestern Center on Wrongful Convictions and Michigan Law School. And things have changed a little bit in terms of who are the sponsoring organizations of universities, but the mission remains the same. We collect data, more than 200 internal data points, and write narrative summaries of every case that fits our criteria. I'll talk about the criteria in a second, but it is 1989 was picked as sort of the beginning fence post because that was the year of the first DNA exploration in the United States. Pardon me. And so it seemed to make logical sense that this kind of ushered in what we would maybe call the modern day era of recognizing, identifying wrongful convictions. And power of DNA really it goes beyond just the individual cases that it helps exonerate, but it has provided a sort of a window, what I call window into the engine room of the criminal justice system, and shows how it breaks down in all kinds of cases, not just cases where there's actually testable biological evidence that you can get a DNA profile and prove or disprove who was or was not involved in the case. When you take a step back and really the Innocence Project, the Innocence Network sort of pioneered this, which is you get a DNA exoneration and you step back and say, what went wrong in this case? And was it a mistaken witness identification? Was it a bad forensics test? Was it, all the different things that can go wrong? And you apply that sort of rubric to cases with non-DNA evidence, and you see that there are people being wrongfully convicted for those same reasons. And they don't have the benefit of what some call DNA, to sort of propel their case towards exoneration sooner. So we have a criteria, and it essentially boils down to you have to be convicted, and your conviction has to be set aside. And it has to either be case dismissed or an acquittal at a retrial. And there has to be some evidence favorable to the defendant that wasn't presented at the time of the trial. It could be because the prosecution hid it. It could be because the police hid it. It could be because there was just new evidence that was developed later. I remember writing up a case where someone was convicted, and I want to say it was in Boston. It was a number of years ago. And when the news of the conviction made the TV, somebody was sitting at home and said, wait a minute, I saw that crime happen. It was a shooting and someone ran out of a store or something, as I recall. And that was not the person that I saw. And so it was a new witness came forward that had never been found before. Sometimes you have cases where the defense wants to present expert testimony And the judge says no. And an appellate court says, wrong, should have been allowed. We're going to vacate the conviction and get you a chance to present your evidence. Could be because there's alibi witnesses that weren't called because the defense failed to properly investigate the case. It could be because a witness recants. We have a whole database internally on witness recantations where you see this especially in child sex cases where there's a custody battle that's going on and a young child um, basically says, well, the stepfather or whoever molested me. And then years later, here's an example. It's the one I like to talk about. It's a case out of Texas where it was a 7-year-old boy. And so he testified that his stepfather had sexually molested him. And there was no physical evidence. And it was basically his word against the stepfather. And then the mother, who was in a divorce proceeding, testified that the boy had made an outcry to her. I think the grandmother might have said the same thing, the mother's mother. So he was convicted and he got sentenced to 20 years. And he did 10. And he got released on parole, and now he's back. Came back to the same town. That's where his own family. And about a year later, he's walking down the street, and who comes walking along the street but this kid who's now 18 years old and says, "What happened to you? You just dropped out of my life." And he says, "What are you talking about? I went to prison for 10 years because of what you said in court." And he said, "I thought I was testifying in the divorce case." He was 7. So he spent 2 years and eventually convinced the district attorney's office that what he had said was a lie because his mother had told him, "Unless you say this, you're never going to be able to see me again." And we see this happen where young children are coerced and used to further, grudges or to extract revenge. And the kids are unwitting and they come forward as adults when they realize the significance of what went on. And one of the things that I think we track we track 6 different causes of wrongful conviction. I'll explain that in a second. But one of the things that we see is that more and more frequently, recantations are starting to be believed. They've always been viewed with great suspicion, were you lying then or are you lying now kind of thing. And judges have been reluctant to overturn convictions on the basis of recantations. But, when you get a recantation and a DNA case and you get other corroborating evidence in non-DNA recantation cases that show that the recantation is true and accurate, judges and even prosecutors start to have some confidence that there can be true recantations. I can't tell you the number of cases that look like there absolutely should be exonerations, but the courts refuse to budge, saying that we just don't believe the recantations. And then you've seen instances where, like, say, in New Orleans and in Chicago, where the recanters, the prosecutors, want to prosecute and go after the recanters. So I'll talk just a little bit about our that's our criteria. And I'd like to say that we keep more innocent people out of the registry than we let guilty people come in that fit the criteria. You could fit the criteria, but if there's unexplained physical evidence of guilt, then you don't get in. An example of that would be, you see cases, particularly in drug cases, where the case will be a conviction, and then they find out that the police officer was corrupt during a period of time. And so the state goes back in and says, we can no longer stand by these cases. So we're going to vacate them because this was, in essence, impeachment evidence that wasn't known to the defense at the time when the detectives or officers testified. Um, but if it's the case where someone got stopped and had a suitcase full of cocaine in the trunk, unless their argument is that it was planted, they basically benefited from the fact that the cop was corrupt.
Right.
That's unexplained physical evidence, and by unexplained, it means it doesn't have an explanation that's synonymous with innocence. Those are relatively few. We track uh, mistaken witness identifications, false confessions, false or misleading forensic evidence, perjury or false accusation, official misconduct, and inadequate legal defense, poor defense lawyer. So those are the six. And every once in a while, you get a case that has, the full Monty, all six contributing factors.
Right.
Um, and so I'll stop there. As I said, we just posted a case. We post about 200 cases a year. Some are cases that happened in the past that we find out about. People find out about our registry and they'll email us and say, "Hey, I think my case should be in there," and send us your documents. And you know what? They're right. Because think about it. How do you find these cases?
What?
You can't call. We have 3,000 counties in this country. You can't call up every county once a week and say, "I had any exonerations this week." They don't track it like that. So we rely on innocence projects, pro bono defense lawyers. The news media is a huge source for us. They still cover these, maybe not quite as aggressively as they once did when, you know, DNA first came on the scene. DNA exonerations were automatic front page news. I worked for the Chicago Tribune for 25 years, and there was a time where I went to one of the editors and said, "I've got a story for tomorrow I can offer for tomorrow about a DNA exoneration that's going to happen tomorrow. And we've got it as an exclusive." And he looked at me and said, "Haven't we done that story before?" And of course I said, "It's somebody else."
Right.
But there is a fatigue factor in there. And we fight that all the time. And what we believe in is the power of data. That you can't say we cherry picked cases to try to make a point. So that when we, for example, published a report on race and wrongful convictions, not all that long ago, it was based on the first 2,400 exonerations. And these are all, vetted, all by our criteria, belong in the registry. And so that we can say that person of color is 7 times more likely to be convicted than a white person. And that's, based on our data. And it wasn't that we just found a couple of good examples and threw together a report. And so that's why we feel like the registry has great power to influence change. Legislation were used by the media, legislators, policymakers, defense lawyers were cited in briefs. So that's a long gospel to start out. So that I'm happy to, you pull the string and I just keep talking.
So, why do you think there's so many wrongful convictions? And I know that it is hard to get a lot of attention when you know that you've been wrongfully convicted. And I know a lot of cases, they don't have DNA evidence, and really trying to find the legal help or the support to, actually bring your case to the forefront and get the help that you need, because we have millions of people who are wrongfully convicted and they can't get any help, or, because they don't have a DNA case. Why do you think that that is so prevalent here in America?
Well, what I always say is we don't know how many people are wrongfully convicted. We only know the ones we know about. Um, we don't know how many people died before they could be wrong. Their convictions could be overturned. We don't know how many people served their sentences and said, "I'm just going to go on and live my life and as best I can," and feel that they have no recourse. We don't know how many people are innocent and there were cases where either the physical evidence was destroyed or there was no physical evidence. The witnesses have died. And so they almost have no way to even prove. Once you get convicted, undoing it becomes so much exponentially more difficult. And um, so, even if it's 1%, think of how many tens, hundreds of thousands of people it is because we incarcerate so many people in this country. And, and the thing is, um, that's just talking about felonies. Think of all the people that get framed by cops for misdemeanors or get framed for a felony and plead out to a misdemeanor and then just go serve their sentence 3 years, 4 years. We have these cases in Chicago where there was a corrupt police officer and his crew where they focused on a public housing development and they framed scores of people and they just put drugs on people and just said, here, these are yours. If they didn't want to pay money,
Right.
for example. And the reality is less than 10% of cases in this country are decided by trial. Most people plead guilty. If everybody went to trial, the system would explode, not designed to handle trials in the vast majority of cases. And if you go to trial, you risk, there's a penalty, there's a tax. You're going to get more time, maybe
Dropping.
double, maybe triple. And, you see these cases, all of these cases that came through Chicago, the defendants will file an affidavit, and almost all of them say, I told my public defender, I told my defense lawyer I was innocent. They said, nobody's going to believe you over a cop because it's he said or he said.
Mhm.
And if you go to trial, you're going to get a lot more time. And so here's the offer 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. And, we have some people that were framed multiple times. They go back to the same milieu, and here comes the bad cop again. You going to pay me now? And no, I don't have any money. Well, okay, off you go. Um, so there's that. And then there's the problem of, you mentioned this, resources. Um, you know, you talk to anybody who works at an innocence project in this country, and there's, about 60 of them. Almost every state has one. Some states have more than one. And they'll say, we don't even want to take a case unless the person has at least 10 years left on their sentence, because it's all about triaging. Because we try to get the ones with the people, what comes first, death penalty cases. So, because that's an outcome that's, then life without parole, because that's another form of a death. And then it kind of, you work backward. And because these cases can take so long to litigate. And what they're trying to do is get people out that don't belong in there. And somebody who's got like less than a year. I mean, unless it's like an absolute throwdown where, put this on the table and the state's going to cave. They triage. That's brutal. The brutal truths, to have to deal with, especially if it's you,
Yeah.
But you see these people occasionally who keep fighting after their release. There was the case that we just added to the registry from New York, Richard Mack, who was convicted um, 47 years ago and of rape and had served his time 7 years. But for the last 40 years, he's been sex offender. And we've enacted those laws to basically punish people for the rest of their lives. They're some of the most draconian laws in the country. And he finally got around and got the Innocence Project in New York to do a DNA test, and the evidence was still there. It was exonerated. We have a list on our website of we call the longest incarcerations list. And this is the list of everyone who spent more than 25 years from the date of their conviction until the date of their release. and there's more than 200. And I think that we have several that are over 40. And you think, how do they manage to do that? How do they come out alive? And then you think, and they do, and they have. And then the same token, you go, and wonder how many didn't, because those are the ones we just don't know about.
Yeah.
Timothy Cole was a case in Texas. And he died in prison, and it was in the process of getting DNA testing. And he had cancer, and he died, and they continued on with the testing, and he was exonerated. And so we have a few posthumous exonerations in the registry. But the fact is that most of the time when someone dies, sort of like that's the end of the road,
Mhm.
sad and tragic as it is, it's really difficult then the way the court system is set up, because the person who's there is not there, what's the jurisdiction anymore, and it can get kind of nasty, especially if the state is opposed. In the case of Timothy Cole, the state had agreed to it, and they said, "Fine, let's just keep going." Um, but the resources problem is seriously the most significant issue, because if you talk to any Innocence Project, the day you put out you're open for business, the next day your mailbox is full.
Well, mhm.
It's full, and so you have to have a staff that screens them, and the process of of, of screening means maybe you have to gather documents. It's a time-consuming process, and then assign an investigator and see, is there anything that can move the needle in this case? I did this work as a reporter in Chicago for a number of years, and I had this case where um, it was three men who were convicted of shoving a teenager down a elevator shaft in
Mm.
a high rise, and it was basically considered to be a gang related thing, and it was based on the testimony of one witness. And by the time that one of them reached out to me, they'd all been sentenced to life. One had died, and the other two were alive in prison. And they said there were phone records that they told their defense lawyer about, but he never got them. And of course, now that this is, you know, 15, 20 years later, those records are long gone.
Mhm.
So I became convinced that these guys were innocent. So as a journalist, what can I do? I have to look at, say, what can I do to make this case um, move the needle? I have to find that witness. And maybe that witness, who I think was early 20s, late teens, who was basically prosecuted as for concealing a homicide and got 5 years and served 2 and testified for the state. Okay, got a deal. Will he stand by that testimony all these years later? And I spent a lot of hours trying to get him to talk to me. And the closest I ever got was um, his brother told me, well, they can prosecute you for perjury. I knew that it was probably a lie. Most likely he had lied. Um, I think it was an accident. The public housing projects were notorious in Chicago during that period of time for, the elevator door opens, and if you don't look first, platform is not always there. Yeah. And so I couldn't do anything. It just haunted me. And eventually the other two guys died in prison.
Wow.
Nothing. I just couldn't do anything. And that's sort of the world we live in, where, in a world of limited resources, if you have two cases in front of you and one has testable evidence, DNA testable, that one's going to come to the front of the queue because you get an answer sooner and it's definitive, mostly in most cases, depending on where the biological evidence came or how it related to the case. And so as I said, it's a triage. It becomes a pecking order. You know, the more time that passes, the harder it is because witnesses die, they disappear. Wouldn't believe how many floods there have been in basements of courthouses over the last 30 years. It's like, oh, well, the records were all, we had a burst pipe and all the records are gone, that kind of stuff. Um, anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you for that insightful information. And I kind of want to piggyback off of what you said as you being a journalist and it really hitting home with you because I know a lot of people do reach out to the news to see if they could find an investigative news journalist because it is hard to go just find a private investigator, especially if you don't have the funds. And then you also have to have a private investigator that wants to invest in that case. And so what do you think could be done to help, the Innocence Project and some of these other organizations who do help people that have claims of wrongful convictions so that we can try to end mass incarceration in America?
Well, there's some organizations that work on the front end, and we call ourselves sort of a front end. What we're doing is providing data that people can use to either affect change to prevent the wrongful convictions in the first place, or to help argue that people are wrongly. You have organizations like the Reform Alliance in Philadelphia that does a lot to end mass incarceration, to work with people who are doing life without parole, to get paroles, to work with legislators to allow for parole. In California, they have the three strikes law. So if your third felony, you could go away for life,
We have
home
it.
life, and you know it could have been for stealing
Gum 3 times in a row.
essentially, and that's sort of been done away with. California has also done away the, um, what we would call the felony murder rule. So, you know, and people who are serving life in California, uh, but who didn't pull the trigger, maybe just happened to be in the same car, they're getting paroled. You know, when I was a journalist, I'd get letters from people and they'd say, you know, you should look at my case. I'm innocent. Um, somebody else did the shooting, but they were convicted under the felony, the accountability law.
Mhm. My husband's convicted of that.
And that's, what that is, yeah, you didn't actually, it's, they call it the law of parties in Texas, where they actually execute people there under the law of parties when the gunman pleads guilty for life. And then the person who was sitting in the car in the parking lot gets death. So California has allowed people are getting paroled now on that. And there's a lot of effort being done to get people out. And even innocence projects are starting to focus more on getting people out, especially say in Louisiana, where tons of people that were sentenced to life. The New Orleans Innocence Project, New Orleans, is doing a lot of work, working with, and this is happening, I would say, primarily in jurisdictions where they have what we call a progressive district attorney who comes in and says, what's the reason for incarcerating these people? Um, there's, I don't know if you know of Jennifer Thompson, but she was the victim of a rape. And she and her, and the man who was convicted of it, who she said that the man, and was exonerated, Ronald Cotton, they wrote a book together about it called Picking Cotton. And they both lecture. And Jennifer's involved with an organization called Healing Justice. And this is for people who not only are exonerees, but who are people who get released on parole, help them get back into the world that is often vastly different from when they went in. And some people never drove a car. Uh,
Mhm.
and so, but her husband does research on incarceration. And, as he says it, we have a system where we have old age homes with barbed wire on it, and we're taking care of this growing number of people who are serving life without parole. And all the studies indicate that people age out of crime.
They do.
You don't see, you know, 55-year-old men robbing 7-Elevens. It's these are crimes that are committed in their 20s and maybe their 30s. And, you know, this is not, this is a young person's problem. And what we have this cycle of is I just saw a story today about St. Louis County where the progressive DA was basically ousted, and the new DA that came in, the number of charges he's filed is virtually tripled in the first 3 months. And progressive DA was very much into diversion programs, and these are young people, and their brains are, still not
Developed like they should go.
right. And
Mhm.
so, you know, we go back to we decided, and I mean we kind of collectively, the current of things in the nation, that the answer to solving so many of our social problems was to shove people into the court system and let them deal with it. And so drug programs died out, they dried up, or had very limited opportunities. And we shoved people into the system, made them felons, and made them, um, you know, exponentially more difficult to try to make a life. And who's the primary victim of this is people of color. It's just, there's no debate about that anymore. Juveniles getting life without parole. And there's a really interesting, Scott Turow, the author, wrote a really interesting book about 20 years ago called Reflections on the Death, how he came to um, being involved in first a case that involved actual innocence, and then another one where it was, he realized our punishment is totally inappropriate. It just
Totally.
isn't the death penalty. We have this notion that we just have to punish people so badly that we just want to grind them under our boot heel and put them away, and as if that's going to make us safer. We know it does.
And there's no data that has proven that that has made us any more safer than what we are today. Because if that's the case, then we would not have any crime at all. And I've been having this conversation a lot to where, talking to people saying that we are literally warehousing communities now because you have juveniles, you have young people, you have middle-aged people, and you have elderly people. So now we are really to the point where we are warehousing communities because I know in North Carolina, they have added palliative care unit to our
Well,
prison.
the fellow I was telling you about, he's in North Carolina, and so he studied their system, and you have fellow inmates who are being hospice care workers, and you see
Mhm.
that at Angola, and North Carolina, and a bunch of prisons where they are actually taking care of their fellow inmate.
Instead of letting it go. Because, we don't have parole unless you committed a crime before 1994. We don't, you're not going to be paroled. You're just going to have, life without parole or the death penalty or however many years you got. And, we have the mandatory minimum as well. So that keeps so many people inside. And then we also have the Conference of DAs, which have advocated for a lot of the criminal justice reform bills not to even go through. Like they have a sponsor that advocates for them to the legislators not to pass these bills. And so we are just continuously to warehouse people in the prison system. The only good thing that we had happen was when they made the law that juveniles shouldn't spend life without parole. So we are starting to get them out. But you have elderly people who are, I had one guy told me he had been in, that was actually on my show, had been in for 42 years and he didn't commit the crime. And they told him that he could have got out in like 1990 but somehow got overlooked. And finally, after we developed the juvenile review board, he's going to be actually getting out. But 42 years of being in prison for something you didn't do. And there's no such thing. We have like one progressive prosecutor in Durham County, and that's it. All the rest of the prosecutors believe in the tough on crime thing, and I think it's really mainly for political gain. Because as we see, the tough on crime has not stopped any crime in North Carolina at all, and it's just really hard here because I know a lot of people that I advocate for, they are wrongfully convicted, and it's just that we don't have any other resources to help them because a lot of, our Innocence Project is small. So, they can only help with so many people.
Right.
And we have North Carolina Actual Innocence, but they've only, I think out of 350 cases, they've only exonerated 15 people,
They
which is
move very slowly.
very slow. And then they just passed the law that makes it harder for them to get out. So it's just trying to figure out what North Carolina can do to ease our criminal justice system because it's overloaded. They don't have staff at all, really, besides maybe like unit managers coming in. And it's like they're not seeing the fact that we're warehousing these many people, but we don't have enough staff to watch them or enough prisons open because we had to close prisons due to them not even having staff at all. And so it's just it's really hard, especially when you're in South. It's really hard to get any help when you have been wrongfully convicted, and there's so many wrongfully convicted people of color, especially in North Carolina.
You know
Um,
there's, an organization called Just Trust. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard just stress. Uh-huh.
Just Trust, the executive director is in, Asheville. Their chief program officer, whose name, I forget, but was, a good friend of, Daryl, um,
Daryl Hunt.
Daryl. Um, I saw some sad news today. Michael Smith died.
He did.
That
Natural
was
causes say so they say natural causes, but you
yeah,
know,
that was, that's a sad he got a raw deal. No, I mean, he got out, but he should have been exonerated, in my opinion. The Just Trust, maybe they can, their focus is on the South, they say. So I don't know, maybe they would entertain some money for a program or something. I would sure hope so. I mean, that's the resources is the big issue, and everybody's fighting for the same money. Unfortunately, foundations get inundated. I had a conversation with somebody the other day who said philanthropy is down because of the political nature of it, where people don't they're generally conservative to begin with, and they don't want to be identified with defund the police, or they don't want to be seen as promoting progressive prosecution things because they'll be viewed as, well, we just want to open the prisons and let everybody out, because people see these, the world is not black and white. I mean, and by that I mean it's we all work in a shades of gray,
Mm.
and it's too easy to say, well, this is the reason why crimes are up, or this is the reason why, you know, look at this district attorney who says he's not going to prosecute people who get abortions, and then the governor says, "Okay, you're gone." So what seems to be the current, by current I mean sort of the way the wind blows, is we want people in there who are hardliners and don't really give a damn about people as human beings, that they're just objects to put on an assembly line and off they go.
they do. And I think I think people need to understand that prison is just modern day slavery. And I know that North Carolina made, I think, around $14 million off of correctional enterprises. So that's another thing that drives incarceration that I need for people to understand is that they're using these people to get resources and things done while they pay them a little or nothing, but the state is having all this money coming in.
but they don't want to let anybody go. So why do you think, like, how can we change that? Because we've tried to change that narrative with bringing in progressive prosecutors, but now we see that, they're trying to give them a bad name. And but my thing is showing that, we have so many people that are wrongfully convicted and the tough on crime rhetoric does not work. So how do we change to make a more just system? Because I mean, it only takes you days, hours, weeks to be convicted, but it could take a lifetime to prove you're innocent.
I think it's a generational problem, and we didn't get here overnight. You go back to really the early '90s when there was a lot of the so-called crack epidemic, and there was a lot of highfalutin rhetoric, and then we heard about juveniles as super predators, and so laws were passed that allowed this to happen. Um, just it wasn't just allowed them to happen, but promoted it, and so I think that it's going to have to be a generational effort. It's going to take time and money. It's going to take legislation. It's going to take proof. So Illinois, for example, is in on the precipice of being the first state to eliminate cash bail. New York tried it and rolled it back. We're going to see there's been study after study after study that basically shows that the cash bail system doesn't contribute anything. It just makes people plead guilty sooner to get out, to get back to their families. And you get who knows how many wrongful convictions occur through that circumstance. We need to focus on getting legislators elected who understand these issues and are willing to pass laws and are willing to resist passing laws that further have further negative impact on the criminal justice system. We need to engage the electorate, and that's increasingly difficult in a really highly divided society where you have people on one side that really wouldn't be satisfied unless they wiped out,
Half a generation.
30% of the population, Um, and so, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight, but we just need to have people, we need to educate our young people um, to get past this and understand that there's a lot of false narratives that get peddled and um, that and to be aware, um, be able to protect themselves from predatory policing. Uh, that's that sort of activity that goes on. I wish I could say, "Here's the plan," and it's going to work, but that's really what we have to do, and it has to be a huge effort. And the Reform Alliance that I would mention, Meek Mill is involved with that, and Jay-Z is involved in that, and they're doing a lot of work on mass incarceration, reducing it. The more that we can get, um, I was on a panel last summer down in Texas talking about these issues, and one of the panelists said, "Not everybody gets a Kim Kardashian," and boy, isn't that the
Right.
truth.
That is so true.
Need more Kim Kardashians. Um, but what she has done, I think, to raise public awareness, and it just needs to be sustained. And the more people who are, from the world of headline celebrity, they have influence. They can reach people that a lot of other people can't, and they're starting to have some, I think, persuasiveness in the system. And we just hope that, they're attracting tech money, which is, well, the registry ourselves, we're fighting for our own survival. Even though we're a 3 university project, their support is in kind through professors and hosting a website. We rely on public donations and public support. And so we're sort of facing our own crisis at the moment and are reaching out to people in hopes that we can raise awareness about what we do and why what we do is
Should be
important.
important.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and from the perspective of, we don't actually represent people. We don't go into court. We can't say we got this person exonerated. What we can do is say Illinois passed a law a couple years ago that bars detectives from lying to juveniles during interrogation. As you know, it's legal to lie. Detectives can lie during interrogations. Um, and
But it's illegal for you to lie to them.
right. Off you go. So when Northwestern University wanted to craft a bill and get legislators involved, they came to us and said, do you collect data on when detectives lie? And actually, we do. Even though it's a legal thing, we collect data on that if we have the evidence that shows it. And here's a list of every exonerated juvenile who falsely confessed and detectives lied. And they took that data and they went to legislators who were, oh my God. And they carried the water. And the bill was passed and the governor signed it. And it's the only state in the country now. And others are starting to model. Well, would that have happened without our data? I don't know. I would like to think that, people want some data. They don't want to just say, well, because you said so.
Right.
No, it's not because I said so. It's because here are the cases to back that up. So we want to continue to perform that function and continue to be out there for people to use us to effect change in the system. It's not going to be overnight. I've always been an optimist. I mean, maybe that's, why I became a journalist, because I was an optimist that we could make things better. But I do think that in the end, that justice is going to prevail. It's taking decades of problems and trying to untangle them and you know undo them. I can think of a better word, but I'm not going to use that. Undo them and make the system work in a way that we save people, that we don't condemn them.
Right.
You know,
Right.
people do bad things. Okay.
Everybody. We're human.
There's no, and I like to say, nobody's as good as the best thing they've done, and nobody's as bad as the worst thing they've done. Everyone, if you believe in redemption and the power of redemption, and I do, um, I think that we should give people the chance to do that. And there will some that won't take it, but they're going to be in the minority because human nature, I think, being what it is. I mean, you see people that come out and it's like, it's one thing if you did the crime, but if you didn't do the crime, I mean, how did you figure out how to put one foot in front of another for 10, 15, 25, 30, 40 years? And you talk to these people and it's, they tell incredible stories about, I couldn't give up hope because then I knew that I was just gonna die myself inside, or it varies, but I always believed that I had people who believed in, and so the more people that we can get to believe and work on it on the front end as well as the back end, because this is the problem. We've got this huge amount of people locked up, and we got to get rid of. We got to reduce this.
Yeah.
We can't just reduce it by death. It's just that's not an end game. It's not going to work. And there was a period of time when I used to think that talking to people's pocketbooks actually was an argument, and maybe that can work. But when you talk about what's the cost of incarceration,
Mhm.
how many tens of thousands of dollars does it cost a year now to incarcerate? How much money do we spend as taxpayers for private prisons, which are a disaster? How much money do we spend as taxpayers to pay judgments that are obtained? Two exonerees in Chicago settled their case. It was just approved yesterday in the city council of Chicago, $25 million.
It's a lot of money.
I used to think that would resonate. I kind of lost faith in that resonates with, in the city of Chicago where they're not self-insured, they're self-insured. So that there's no insurance company that's going to come in and bail them out. That's coming out of taxpayers' pockets. I think that it has to be all across the waterfront.
It
It has
does.
to be from beginning, pillar to post, beginning to end. And people need to understand that it has an impact on them, whether it's their tax dollars, whether it's whether they have a false sense, you know, I'm afraid to go out of my house because crime is so bad, or, there's a lot of false narratives that are being peddled out there. The press, you talked about the press before. There's just not as many people around doing this kind of work as there once were.
Mhm.
Uh, it's not it's cheap. It's not really incredibly expensive, but it's you know when I was a journalist, what did I want most? I wanted time, I wanted resources to be able to do what I could do. I wanted space in the newspaper, and all that costs money. And I was there at a time when it was fortunate that we had editors who supported that, believed in it. Um, when I left the Tribune, when new management, new ownership came in, um, my reporting partner, and we've done all these investigations, helped get a couple dozen people out of prison. They put them over in the food section to be an investigative reporter to find out, well, is it really gluten free? Um, and disbanded the criminal justice investigation. So there's still some that do it. Um, there's some that do it as freelancers, and they don't always have an outlet that'll, you know, getting back to that. Well, haven't we done that story before? It's
Right.
someone else. It's someone else. Um, so I remain an optimist at a time when it can seem daunting. And I feel like the more we just have to keep doing what we're doing. Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
It's going to do it. Right.
Well,
So, let me ask you this, or what are your thoughts on this? So, I'm an advocate. I got into this advocating for people who are wrongfully convicted, and I advocate for people who are in prison who aren't being treated fairly. And I've also advocated pretrial, and it was a guy in North Carolina that was being convicted, or they were trying or accusing him of a murder that he didn't commit, and it was basically identical to my husband's case. They were trying to charge him with felony murder because he had been through the system before and they just knew that he had committed this horrific crime. And so what I did was I went in and I attended a few of his court dates, as well as, after the court date, I would do a press release. And luckily there was a news station that was following it, trying to help bring awareness to his case, but you don't have many of those. And they showed up. And so what I did was I just showed up to his court dates and I interviewed the family a few times. And then we did a press conference and we interviewed the family, or let the family talk at the press conference, just to humanize him as a person. And
right.
so we were actually able to get him off of that charge. It was a capital murder charge. And the jury found him not guilty on the capital murder. And of course, they wanted to bring him back for second degree murder. And I just kind of stayed in the media and posting on social media that he was innocent and that the prosecution was just trying to take another black man off the street with felony murder, because North Carolina loves to use the felony murder rule to grab as many people as they can and put them in prison.
Mm.
And so that in itself helped him to be able to, I think it was the day of his second trial, the prosecutor came with a plea deal, which I don't agree with plea deals at all. But I mean, he could not deny that plea deal because they gave him 14 years where he could have got life plus 20 because he had another felony case that was in a different county that they would have added on to that. But just seeing the difference in me being able to go to the media and humanize him as a person, because of course the prosecution had put a gag order where the defense couldn't say anything. So I was the one that was out there voicing and shifting the narrative that, he's he might have done some things, but he didn't do this, and we have evidence that he didn't do it.
Uh,
And so I think that that was a game changer for him. And so I just wonder if we could have more advocates help defense attorneys, because I know a lot of defense attorneys are overwhelmed and underpaid, especially public defenders. And we know that scale is one-sided because prosecution gets all the funding that they need to prosecute somebody, but the a public defender's office sometimes can't even get money to get a witness, an expert witness to come testify. And so, let alone with them having hundreds and thousands of cases to one attorney, and you have murder cases, those take years to go through, what's termed 2 years. And so do you think that having people to advocate pretrial could kind of help reduce the number of people who are being wrongfully convicted or incarcerated for a long amount of time?
I absolutely do. Sunshine is a great medicine. You were this guy's Kim Kardashian. Um, you really were. And there's plenty of people that can be Kim Kardashians just like you without having you know, all the trappings. But the fact is that, you know, by bringing attention to cases, and you're right, defense lawyers often they're proscribed from doing certain things and they're limited by what the court or the judge particularly, or what what they're allowed to do. But we don't, as members of the public, have the same sort of prescriptions. That's the kind of stuff. It may not seem like much, but it is. It really does, and have an impact. And I think that prosecutors act a little differently when they know that people are watching them. They,
Mhm.
you know, face it, people have to stand for election. You have to be somewhat at least cognizant of what's going on around you. And a lot of what happens out of the eye of
Oh,
everyone, but the family of the victims or the family of the accused. And a lot of when you talk about the accused, they don't know where to turn. They don't know who to talk to. They don't. And so, you know, your mailbox, I'm surprised, is not full. Uh,
oh, it's very full. I got my own husband I'm trying to get out as well. But
right.
that's where I came up with the Black Light Incarceration show, to have those people be able to come on and have a safe space and not feel like they're being judged. Because I've heard a lot of people who have went to media and other podcasts and they kind of basically just got smeared or they were judged. But to bring attention and give them their time and space to tell their story, because most of the time your story is never told. I know my husband's situation, he was all over, every single newspaper and every time you turn on the news, you saw, his case. And so he never had the chance to tell his side of the
Right.
story. And so I made this podcast so that people like him and other people who have been wrongfully convicted, which there's thousands, millions of them, can tell their story and hope that somebody hears it and, wants to come and help them, because we know that you only hear the side of the story from the state. You don't never hear their true actual story. And so that's the reason why I made this show. And I talk about it on my show all the time for people to get involved in your budget, to go to budget classes, because I know I didn't get involved in any, like I know we have the NC Budget Center. I didn't get involved with that until I started advocating for my husband, understanding that my tax-paying dollars is being used to mistreat them. My tax-paying dollars is
Right.
used to go towards prisons and to, falsely accuse or wrongfully convict people while they're just, okay, like we'll throw out this $1 million lawsuit. And that's not fair to us, because we work hard for our money and we need to understand that we have to demand them, because the people have the power. And I think that we have so long been blindsided by our government thinking, oh, well, they got it. They know what to do with the budget. They'll take my money and put it in places where it's supposed to go. And that's far from the truth, as we see. And
Right.
so I always encourage people to get involved in your local budget center and figure out where your money's going. You can easily look up the budget for the sheriff and how much money that they request and exactly what the money is going to. It'll break it all the way down. And so I always encourage people that in order to change things, we have to know where our money is going and we have to demand that we don't want our money to continue to go inside of the prison or jails or the courthouse because it's not making our communities safe. It's not making our communities thrive. And, I want America to know that you can make your economy boom with thriving communities, not incarcerating the communities, but
Yeah.
having them to where they have sustainable living and sustainable wages. And that's the thing. We don't have resources. That's the reason why people, if they do commit a crime, they go right back because once you come out and you've been labeled, all your rights and resources are basically gone. So what else are you going to do when you have a baby that's starving? You got to go out there and get it how you live because you got a baby that's looking at you, or you got younger children, or a wife, or a grandmother, or a grandfather, whatever. You know what I mean? And so you have to provide for your family. And I think that that's where we have got it twisted in America. We label our people and we throw them away, when I've been studying the Norway model really well. And the way that they go about it is the way that everybody should go about it. Like, if you are incarcerating people, make sure that you're treating them with dignity and humanity and not taking away their living, their social living, their connection with their family, but to get to the root cause, because punitive punishment will never get to the root cause of what has happened. And we know that as far as the drugs go, that our own government has brought the drugs in. That's how the crack got in to the communities, was your president that at that time that brought it in. So I think that we have to do better about shifting the narrative and having everybody help shift that narrative. Because, like I said, we've been blindsided for so many years by our government telling us one thing, and it's totally far from what they're telling us. That is the whole rhetoric. And so that's not where we really need to be. And so I talk about it a lot. So please get involved in your budgets and please reach out to somebody who's incarcerated, because just having hope and that support can make a world of difference for them.
You're absolutely right. And when we talk about sort of the disappearance of the press, one of the things that has emerged are podcasts such as yours, and podcasts that have taken a look at wrongful convictions, and they've grown exponentially. And that's been something that didn't exist, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was just not something that, and so there are more of those. So, and I think that they all do what you're talking about, which is raise consciousness and, education, consciousness raising. Um, if people feel like they have a meaningful way to have some input, um, uh, that's really what we're trying to figure out. I mean, people say, "What should I do?" I say, "Well, you can start with learn about what's going on, educate yourself in the system, figure out, you're a voter, you can influence other people's votes, you can advocate for people. Um, we're not as powerless as we might think sometimes, and find an organization that you want to help support. Sometimes it might feel like this is just a big giant wall topped with barbed wire that we're trying to butt our heads against, but you know, and it can feel that way because that's what 30 years of this kind of policy in this country has led to. We just need to keep fighting the good fight like you're doing.
We do. Well, Maurice, I thank you so much for all of your expertise. It has been wonderful. I know that you have a website. I know that you have a book. Let people know where they can follow you or find your book. And then, if you want to give out the national exoneration information, just in case there's somebody, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in North Carolina that's listening, that can actually, might be on your exoneration list who don't think that they can, how they can reach out to them.
Well, just Google National Registry of Exonerations and it pops right up and you'll see us. The one thing, we don't investigate the cases. We just get them after exoneration. When people write to us, we try to point them in the right direction, saying, my sister, my brother, my father, what can you do? And I'll say, well, here's this innocence organization that you might reach out to. Increasingly, prosecutors are starting to set up what we call conviction integrity units to actually do that work. Some of them are legit. Some of them are window dressing
Mhm.
as a way to get, perhaps get votes. But Some of them really do great work. If there's anybody out there who's got a rich uncle who wants to support our continuing work, we have a donations portal.
Please donate to them, y'all. Please.
Yeah.
They do great work. They really do.
Well, listen, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on and
Thank you.
doing what you're doing, sweetheart.
I
Really.
will. I am. Okay. And somebody's got to do it. I mean, I just want to
Right.
be a, example to show that it can be done. And with us together, we can move mountains.
It can be done.
Yeah.
Most definitely. All right.
All right, Maurice. Take care. Have a good one.
You too.
So thank you again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Your host, Sierra Cobb. Take care.